My name is Bret Curry. I'm a cinematographer and photographer based in Los Angeles. Because I work in both motion and stills, it's important for me to have tools that can quickly switch modes. And Leica built their SL2 and SL2S with that need in mind. I believe the highest compliment you can give a camera is that it completely gets out of the way and allows you to focus on the image, the environment, and the people around you. A camera can be a passport to new worlds as well as an interpretive companion, and the SL2 cameras are at home in every new place I bring them.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Kellum. I am the Product Communication Specialist at Leica Chem USA. So glad to have you with us today. We have an amazing guest with us today, Bret Curry. But before we talk with Bret Curry, I want to do some housekeeping. We have the chat function on the Zoom feature here and the question section. I invite you to use the question A function for questions. And of course, you may input your some more questions or ideas through the chat. We'll have some people talking on there as well. Without further ado, Bret Curry, thank you so much for joining us. You are a photographer and cinematographer. Bret, thank you.
Nathan, thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor to speak to you. Well, it's an honor to always to see you. So you kind of saw in the video, I'm a cinematographer and photographer based in Los Angeles. I currently am in Texas for a commercial shoot right now, but I divide my time mostly, 80% cinematography or motion and then 20% stills professionally, but kind of shifts depending on the year and what's going on. But I shoot documentary, commercial, narrative, music videos, kind of a generalist in both senses, motion and stills. So yeah, that's me.
For those who don't know you, do you mind telling us a little bit about your story? How did you get started with photography? How did you get started with cinematography?
Yeah, I mean, it's very kind of basic story, kind of the same as a lot of DPs my generation. We got, started doing, skateboarding photography and, shooting friends skateboarding and everything like that. And then, just started making, short films and things like that with friends during high school. And then during college, so I was in Dallas at the time, so interned for the Dallas Morning News and Getty Images. And then kind of took those connections after college and then continued working in commercial world or documentary world more so. And yeah, just kept doing it ever since.
And does your photography, play a part in your cinematography? Is there something that you do as far as scouting locations? How did those two come together when you're working?
When I'm working, a lot of it is that I'll just have, for the last 5 years, it'll be a Q or a Q2 on me that I'll take, behind the scenes photos with. It's just kind of fun to, piggyback on the production design and the situations you're in and the people you're around to collect as many cool photos as you can. I will take the SL2 on scouts with me with like a 24-70 because it equates to large format sensors now, and I can get a good idea of what focal lengths we'll need for any given situation. But yeah, they kind of, they interweave sometimes in, ways that are requested by the producers. Like they'll ask me to, take behind the scenes photos or to get, additional set photography if they don't have a set photographer, which happens more often than not. And yeah, that's about it.
Well, let's dive into your cinematography.
Mhm.
Um, we saw some shots of you working in the field in this particular video. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and what happens on set when you're having this gear with you? Do you, I'm sure there's a lot of pre-planning, of course, before the shot starts, but what happens in your mind as far as the cinematographer when you're thinking about gear going into a project?
Yeah, I mean, for this, like these particular images, we're kind of trying to create a similar situation to like a small documentary shoot, where you'd have a single camera package, small lens kit, lightweight sticks, maybe an easy rig, something like that, and then still camera with you as well. Or maybe you just have an SL2 and SL2S, and you use both of those for motion and stills, and just build out the camera a bit more with a monitor, or follow focus or something like that. But yeah, I mean, looking at these, it's essentially, like I said, it's a small documentary shoot, um, and yeah. Continue with your question, Nathan, if
Yes,
you can.
is the selection of
Yeah,
lenses, for example, is that something that you talk about with the director at first? Is there a,
yeah,
a look that you're going for, and that's how you select your gear? How does
for
that
sure.
process work?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of dependent on the style of shoot. So if it's a shoot that has, support of a first AC or a second AC or a full camera team, and you have, wireless focus and things like that, then you can, you learn, that implies a couple different things, but you can, take that from there and, put, lights primes or, Summicron Cs or Simulux Cs or something like that on that you can tie a, tether a remote focus to and work in that such sense. If you're a little bit more run and gun and lightweight and you're trying to keep the package small, like in this situation, I think there are Apo-Summicron SL lenses on there with a little tilt to follow focus. um, so yeah, it's kind of dependent on resources and also the look you're going for. Like all those lenses I just mentioned right there are very modern, very beautiful, but very clean lenses. That's kind of true for all Leica glass, essentially. Like some of them have, if you go to the Summilux, you get wide open, a little bit more dreaminess. And the
Sure.
Summicrons are
Yeah.
just like insane in terms of like just performance. So those are things you would talk about too. And then, yeah, I mean, beyond lensing in that sense, a lot of times what I like to do is shoot with very clean lenses and then use front filtration. So I'm not
Mm.
necessarily like tied to a certain look. Um, so I'll use like 1/8 black pro mist in front of like a very clean modern lens that'll get me kind of the best of both worlds. Rambling a little bit, but yeah, that's a
No, and it's, I
bunch of
mean,
factors
super
go in.
interesting.
Yeah.
And how many times in your shoots that are coming up here where the request of having a smaller camera is something that's very desired? I know there's a bunch of different options you can choose from in the world of cameras and lenses, and this particular setup right here, you can just pull off the tripod and use it for a photography camera, or you can put the follow focus accessories on there. Is that something that's been in demand in the recent times, or is it just
Um,
depending on the project?
it depends on the project. I would say very much so for situations in which you need to stay a little bit more low key. For whatever reason, I haven't had to do a lot of those projects recently, so we've erred towards the kind of the standard like Area Alexa with or Area Alexa Mini with whatever primes we end up with and an easy rig, stuff like that for documentary shoots. But a lot of times I'll always have my SL2 with me, and so while that camera we prep it at like the rental house and it stays built and we just kind of don't mess with it. The SL2 is nice because I can just pick it up and go. And so yeah, it's a little, it's all dependent on situation. Yeah.
We already have some questions from the chat here from Jim. Question
Mhm.
is, can you talk about the focus settings, techniques you prefer to use on the SL2? You talked about already the follow focus mechanism that
Mhm.
you can attach to this camera. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process and how you set that up?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm using like say the Apo Summicron SL lenses, the really great thing about that I think, or about those that I think is um, was introduced in a firmware update in the last year was the linear focus. So you're not tied
Absolutely.
to
Yeah,
the kind of the exponential thing that happened before.
indeed.
So yeah, I mean, if I'm using those lenses, I would say mostly I'm just pulling off the barrel and
Hmm.
setting it to the linear focus. And like, I can't remember what specific setting because you can like choose like 10 different degree settings to
Yes,
set that to. It's pretty
indeed.
fine tuned. I think it's like 180 or something like that.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, so that's what I'll use. And then if I'm using, say, like a PL mount, then I'll almost certainly use some sort of airy follow focus, or if it's a wireless follow focus, it'll be Airy or Preston wireless follow focus with that. But yeah, if it's a super small setup, I think in these photos I have like a little Tilta follow focus that's kind of like a it hooks onto one of the rods and it sort of sits on there with pressure. And the
Sure.
Apo-Summicron um, SL lenses, they're like really super smooth and nice to use by hand, but they're a little stiff to use with that particular situation. So I would kind of recommend just pulling off the barrel for those.
Mm,
It seems to be the smoothest situation. Um, yeah. And then if you're using
fantastic.
like the M0.8, which I haven't yet used those lenses, but they're, rehoused, cinevised M lenses. I think they have longer throws. I don't know for sure if they're able to do that, but that you might put a follow focus on those because they'd probably be a little looser. Um,
Yeah,
but
they
again, you'd probably
they
pull off the barrel. Yeah.
they are redesigned for, I mean, specifically
Hmm.
for cinematography. And so I think that having just the look that what we just talked about before, where you love the M lens look and you want to apply it
Hmm.
to, a cinema project.
Yeah.
We've talked to a bunch of different artists that have attached it to some of the, like the Alexa Minis, for example, smaller devices that you could
Hmm.
attach to, things that are flying like drones, or attaching it to
Hmm.
vehicles or things like that. I think
Yeah.
it's nice on the SL2, for example, of having the ability to have the choice of have so many lenses, because we have access to all the cinema lenses that most cinema cameras have. But like you said, the SL lenses is an option, the M lenses is
Hmm.
an option. A lot of cinematographers use R lenses as well, and they
Yeah.
click the aperture. It's
Hmm.
that look, and the decision of choosing the gear that you need for that specific project seems to be a pretty important decision, as far as, because it's literally how the look of the project is going to be. um
Yeah, like to that point, I mean, it's probably the most important decision because we have such a, wealth of options in terms of cameras nowadays. They're all so good. Certain things do certain things better, certain things can handle higher resolutions at higher frame rates, things like that. But if you're shooting, 23:9:8, 24 ProRes 422, just like kind of your basic standard like thing, um, you can do a lot with a lot of different cameras. Um, and then it's at that point, yeah, I think it's mostly about like, yeah, it's lens choice visually, and then it's user experience, um, of actually using the camera and having to use it for, weeks on end and not having to want to fiddle with like all the, settings when I wanted to have like the basic, core photography, functions easily at hand. Which is something I love about the SL2. That's super good.
Absolutely. We
Yeah.
have some more questions here from the chat.
Mm.
Question from Fran: for someone who is starting out, wants to start in cinematography, is there any way to start prepping your mind, and get a hand of it? Any software programs that you should learn first? Any books? Any particular classes? Maybe some inspiration from you, Brett?
Yeah, I think
How,
in terms of programs, I would say download DaVinci Resolve because it's free. It's essentially, 99% of what you'll need to, take something all the way through post in terms of editing and color grading. And it's really a crazy robust program. So that's good to have. There is a book that just came out. It's called the CineLens Manual. It's like a 200 page,
hmm,
it might actually be more than that. No, I'm sorry. It's an 836 page manual that is just completely the most incredible, resource I've ever seen in terms of how lenses work. And, it goes through every different lens set you could ever think of and talks about the characteristics and the specs and all of that. So that's a great book to get. And then A lot of people give the advice of like shoot with whatever camera you have,
Mm,
um, which is useful up to a certain point. But if you want to work professionally, I think the best thing to do, and a fairly easy thing to do if you're around any center of production, is just to try to get on set as a production assistant or a camera PA and just
mm.
shadow. If you want to be a camera assistant, then you can shadow the camera assistants. If you want to, be a DP, then shadow the DP, or just find some way to like get on set and observe, and then get your hands, dirty in whatever way that you can. Um, yeah, that's those are my pieces of advice.
Fan- Fantastic. I want to
Yeah.
dive deeper into this picture right here, the setup that you have here in the desert.
Yeah.
And for I kind of want to start from zero. You know, we have the camera, it's attached to this video tripod. Tell us how the setup works for someone who's never used a video camera before. We got cables coming out of the camera into looks like a
Mhm.
screen. We got ways to shield the lens from flares. Tell us a little bit more about what's going on, please.
Yeah, so I mean, at a base, a camera is a box with a sensor in it. So or box with a film plane, one of those two. And from there we have lens attached. I think that's one of the Apo Summicron SL lenses.
Yes.
And then in front of that, attached to that, is what's called a matte box. So that serves two purposes. One, it's essentially a big lens hood. It just keeps flares off the lens. It controls the light. You can attach, right now it has an eyebrow on it, so it's a little shade that goes in front. Those can go on the sides to give more protection, and you can put hard mats in those too, which like basically like make uh, the opening as small as it can be without vignetting the lens.
Mm.
So those are all different ways to control the light coming in. Sometimes you want the light to flare the lens too. It's a creative choice. Or you want to lose the weight, or you don't want to, stab somebody with a matte box or something. So you take it off. But also the matte box, that is a place where you can put 4x4, 4x5, 6 filters into, so ND filters, diffusion filters, other creative filters, and then almost all matte boxes like this have a polarizer, like a circular polarizer stage, so that you can
Hmm.
put the Pola in. It either comes in the 4x5 tray and you put it straight in, and then there's a little like thing that you can rotate the Pola, or you can actually rotate the Pola. So
Nice.
yeah, that's where all that goes. And then let's see, what else do we see?
And
So
the
the
reason
knob
why
on the
you would want to
side.
have
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
the reason why you would want to have filters and polarizers is because unlike in photography, you don't have as many options to try to stop light, right? Like you're kind of locked
Exactly. So
into usually aperture or shutter speed, or please go ahead.
totally. Yeah. So say you're shooting at 24 frames per second. Your shutter speed will probably be 148 or 180. It'll be 180 degrees, of whatever frames per second you're at, essentially.
And what does that
And
mean,
then
180 degrees?
so if you think about a classic like film shutter plane, it means that if it's a 360 circle, it's of the you know half of that circle. So you're exposing half the time. It's kind of
Right.
hard to see without seeing, but it's some of these things are just like things that you learn and you internalize and you forget why they're things. And that's why that one book, the CineLens Manual, is great, because you can like pick it up and read a chapter and be like, I knew that, but I didn't know why I knew that. um, anyway, so beyond that, yeah, follow focus on there. That's that tilt of follow focus that I was talking about, that you can see kind of connects to one bar. Doesn't really function great. I think I probably took this off pretty soon after that. Nothing against that. It's just not the right setup. And then on top of that, I mean, okay, so I mean, the main thing that everything is built off of is like a cinema cage, is what a lot of the companies call them. Basically, it takes a DSLR or box camera like an Alexa or a any a red or anything like that, and gives 3/8 and quarter 20 holes all around it, so you can mount monitors and other junk on the
Sure.
camera. And
Yeah.
so this particular one is made by a company called Lock Circle out of Italy. It is, and so is the matte box as well. it's absurdly nice. It's too nice, I would say. It's crazy nice. But yeah, no, that encases the camera, kind of protects it, and then you can have a handle where you can grip it up top so you can operate from the handle, or you can lift it up, on and off the tripod. And then you can see there's an eye bolt attached to that. That's where if you have like a easy rig, you can take down the little thing that clips on and then put it into that. And that's an easy way to do that. And then on
Right.
top of that is, and stop me at any time, I'm just rambling, but
No, please go ahead. This is amazing.
yeah, on top of that is a Ninja 5 by Atomos. It's like a 5-inch monitor, and that's the monitor that seems to support the SL2, SL2S the most. And that, it has all its monitoring functions. You can use it just to see a bigger picture, or, angle it in certain directions that you couldn't angle the monitor because there's no tilty screen.
Sure.
And that also has a recording function to it as well. So um, I'd have to go through like the charts, but essentially there's a couple situations in which you get higher bit rate recording out of the Ninja. And I think as of a week or two, you can get much higher bit rate recording, but you can get
Yeah.
remarkably good quality straight out of the camera too. Um,
A lot of times it
so
has to do with just the
yeah,
limitation of the memory card, right? The speed at which
yes.
the card is being written to, and it's just not sufficient for the type of
Hmm.
bit rate and data coming out of the camera. And so a lot of
Yeah.
cameras will use the in this case a full HDMI out,
Hmm.
that you can attach a US HDMI cord to the recorder, and the recorder will understand what kind of feed is coming off the camera, and you'll be able to then utilize that to have it in RAW, for example, such the new firmware update for the SL2S,
Yeah.
10-bit 422 for the SL2. It just allows you to have more capabilities and more post-processing power in an editing room.
Yeah, and I think that Angelbird, recorder, or the card that slides into the back of the monitor, I think that's a 256 card, which is, obviously more than you're probably going to put as an SD card into the camera. Um, so that's cool. Maybe not obviously. I guess you could do that with SD as well. And then everything you see is powered at the end of that rod system by a micro V mount battery. It's on a little plate that sits at the back. Um, and that has what's called a P tap out, which is just kind of a universal um, power port that you can string to your monitor, or to your wireless follow focus, or your you know wireless video transmitter, or different accessories to power those. And the cool thing about these FX Lion little V mount batteries is that they have a USB-C
Right.
port on them, so that can power directly the SL2 and SL2S, which is handy. I think there'd be another way to do it where you could have like an intermediary P-tap to USB-C, but it would just be more cabling. Um, so it's a pretty darn elegant solution. As you'll see in probably future slides too, it kind of is built up vertically in a similar way to like the Canon C series cameras are, which are great for documentary shooting because they kind of like, instead of like putting it on your shoulder, which can be nice, you can kind of like cup it, and
Right.
put your hand there, and you can't see my hand, but yeah, under there, and it just keeps it tight to your body, keeps it small, low profile, so you can have like a more built out camera without it being
Yes.
so much like a bazooka sort of
Right.
situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
The advantage of having such a small system. I mean, if you do happen to have a bigger lens like this setup right here with the cine lenses,
Hmm.
the weight is not really of an issue. Still, it's nice to have all that connected
No.
to the cage and all that connected into one setup. You for video, you want to be as smooth as possible. You don't want to have any kind of that jitter. So if everything's
Hmm.
locked in place, this is really helpful for getting that smooth shot.
Yeah.
And we have
So what?
this.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, please go ahead.
Well, I was going to say what you're seeing now. So basically, we the main sort of thesis of this entire project was like build this camera out. So if it was an A cam on like a show or a documentary, like what would that look like? How would you actually do that if you were going to do that? And so this is probably
Sure.
the best example of that. So we took the camera and the cage and some of the accessories, but we to 2020 camera in Marina Del Rey. Which another thing that I would recommend people who want to get into the camera department or who are interested in cinema cameras and the accessories and everything, go on, just type in, if you're in Denver, say Denver Camera Rental House or something like that, and just go and look at their inventory. Like you should go to 2020camera.com and look at their inventory, and you can see all the different lenses they have, all the accessories, and then you can take those and copy and paste them in Google and see what the heck those things are. But anyway, so this is kind of very similar to what we saw before. The kind of the main difference is, actually, Nathan, can you go back to that one at the rental house? There you go. The main difference is that you have a PL mount lens on there, so it's like a kind of a classic cinema lens. One of the differentiators between like a cinema lens and like the Apo Summicron SLs or anything that's autofocus or servo based, or even like an R or an M lens, is that these things are made typically like in a standard length so that you don't have to move your accessories around. They're made fully manual, and declicked, so there's no jump when you change aperture, and the focus is very long. So when you turn it, it takes a while to get to the other side of the focal plane. And yeah, they're made just standardized to work with a camera crew. So that's what you see here is a Summilux C lens. I don't know what focal length, but they all kind of look the same. And then the other main difference between this that you probably can't see here, but you can see in the video, is that it's hooked to a single channel ARRI wireless follow focus unit. So that's the first assistant camera would take a little follow focus on a box that's connected between a radio and a motor on the camera, and if you twist that, then it changes the focus. Right. And so that's like one less thing. It's nice. I like working that way, and most DPs do, and most operators do, because then you only have to focus on the framing, and you have somebody that's making sure it's tack sharp.
Right. And that's another difference as far as using cinema lenses, is that, not all, but a lot of cinema lenses are Super 35. And so having
thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's there are lenses out there that, that do like the Thalias, for example. They're for much bigger sensors. But in this particular case here, the cinema lenses, the Summilux lenses, are designed for Super 35. And in the SL2,
that's exactly it. Yeah. So these kind of funny, they don't cover the full frame of the SL2 sensor. The Summilux Cs don't. The Thalias do, and the Lights Primes do, and then most of the Summicron Cs do. They have a large enough image circle that it covers the full frame image. But for this instance, we had to drop into APS-C mode so that it was a little bit closer to Super 35, which is fine to do. It just doesn't cover full frame. But that's what they had in their inventory at the time, which was Summilux Cs and not anything else that had the red dot on it. So that's what we went with. Yeah.
I wanted to speak about this particular setup here. We saw this in the video where you strapped a camera onto a car. Can you tell us a bit more about how that's even possible?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. Essentially all you need, like it's all at hand at all times, but like you need some sort of remote head. So in this case, it's a Ronin 2. This is the exact same camera setup that you just saw at the rental house, just popped into a gimbal cage, and that is flipped upside down, and it's on a Kessler Killshock 2, I think is the mount. It's like a mono suction cup mount that goes dunk, and then there's a inflatable tube inside of it, and it's just keeps the shake minimal, and then the gimbal does the rest mostly, and then that's ratchet strapped to the car. Probably not the 100% most stable way to do this, or the right way to do this, but it works. It was fine. And then inside the car is a I mean, you can do it a couple different ways. You can either use the Ronin 2 joystick, which is like, it literally looks like a, 80s, video game joystick
Sure,
that you
yeah.
hold in your hand, and it's very intuitive. Or you can use the DJI like master wheels, which are I think you'd have to
Right.
go to the video to see what those look like. But these in particular are Noto inertia wheels that are, one wheel tilts and then one wheel pans, and you have to like,
Yes.
so it's based on if you look up geared head, like Airy geared head or Panavision geared head on Google, you'll see what like the old version of that looked like. Um, but that's really good, nice, controlled, repeatable way of operating the camera, and it's the only way to operate the camera because you have to operate it wirelessly because you can't physically touch it when it's on a remote head. So that's what you're seeing there is just a monstrosity of a camera
And,
situation on top of a small car that it shouldn't be on top of. Yeah.
and as a cinematographer, are you speaking with the director because they're having the camera strap onto a car, you're adding another layer of motion of somebody driving or following your subject. How does that process work? Are you mic'd up with your teammates in the car
Yeah.
or things like that? How does that work?
So everybody nowadays has these ear tech like wireless comm. It's like a single ear and it's open comm if you put the microphone down. So we'll talk to each other via that. A lot of times there'll be like a follow car, and then whoever's driving he'll have done it before, hopefully, so that he kind of knows what to look out for and knows the safety procedures. And yeah, no, it's just like kind of communicating with the car that you're shooting or the subject that you're shooting, and the follow car with people viewing, and then the camera car. Um, yeah,
And for
it's
situations like
usually
this
like,
where
I mean, it's best to hire like this situation. My friend Sam Amelia, he works with a company called LA Gimbals, and this is what they do. They specialize in it. There's a
mm,
great company out of Salt Lake City called Override Films that they're just the best at this stuff. I mean, there's Filmotechnic in LA. There's a bunch of people who do great work. And ideally, if you're strapping something this big to a car, you kind of want to have people that know what they're doing so that, it's
right.
a lot of money there. But,
Yes.
for like a smaller situation, I mean, Kessler and Tilta and other companies, if you just have, the smaller version of the Ronin, I mean, and some sort of way to wirelessly control the camera, you can do a lot with a little, and you don't have to have quite that much of a team. Yeah.
And how does focus works in these environments? There's different ways I know that you can focus. You can
Yeah.
manually focus, of course. You can set the focus and stop down the aperture. There's lasers. What would be like the best solution for this particular shoot?
I mean, probably the best solution would be what you saw in that previous slide, which is basically just, wireless, wireless focus. That one is a single channel, but if you had a 3-channel one, it would control focus, iris, and zoom.
Mm,
Company called Preston is like the leader in that area, makes great units. And then on the lower end, like Hedon and there's another one. There's other options essentially, but like ideally, probably what you want to do, unless you have like a creative reason not to, is put a zoom lens with focus, iris, and zoom control on a wireless hand unit, and then send that picture out to a monitor for the first AC, and he'll keep it in focus. And you can maybe add in another hand unit if you want to control the iris, but
mm.
and then you have somebody controlling the framing, either with the joystick or the wheels. And then it's just kind of a dance between the subject and the picture car and everything like that. And then obviously everything has to come via wireless video. So the main company that provides those transmitters is called Teradek. They're kind of
Mm.
the industry standard, but I think in this there's a Hollyland transmitter, which they're really good. They seem to be a bit more laggy than Teradeks, but they're also way cheaper too. Um, yeah, just
We got it.
information.
We,
Yeah.
No, it's great. There's, a lot of people that come to the stores that are interested in this camera are either
Hmm.
people that have experience with cameras, but there's also people that are just starting out. So having all this information is really useful, Brett. Really, thank you for this.
Yeah, yeah.
We have a question from a fellow cinematographer, Greg Hannon. Good to see you on the chat. When looking at the SL2 footage, when comparing to the RE Red and Black Magic, what do you see as a benefit to having a camera that produces amazing photographs as well as beautiful cinema quality footage? So it's kind of a two-parter. What are your thoughts on the SL2 compared to the other cameras that you used? And what are the benefits of having a camera that can do a little bit of both, photography and video?
I mean, yeah, I think that's the main benefit is not having to bring an extra camera, and it's dependent on the situation that you're in too. Like, you may be in a situation where you're shooting a documentary that requires both stills and motion, and you can only bring maybe a camera, in a small cage, maybe an extra monitor. You probably would want one in this case, and a couple lenses and something that can quickly you either maybe you just don't take it out of the cage when you want to shoot stills because that lock circle one you definitely don't have to. I would say if you have a production where you're shooting like a cam as a bit more dedicated of a motion camera, in my experience it cuts like the log footage at the same bit rates that you're shooting an Alexa or a Red or a Venice or something like that. It cuts really well with it. I think it still has some of the rolling shutter issues that all DSLR cameras seem to have. But if you're not
Sure.
stressing it in certain ways, then you're good to go. And then I was talking with John the other day, like with the most recent firmware update for the Ninja with that 12-bit recording. I mean, that's probably in a lot of situations overkill unless you're either on the very very high end and you can manage that much data, or you are on a maybe it's something smaller where you're managing the amount of shots that you're getting, or it's just a small project that's contained and you can shoot 4 terabytes of data and that'll be everything.
Right.
Um, but gosh, I mean, I mean, it's hard to put up the images next to each other and find too much fault in the SL2 image and the SL2S. I mean, the SL2S, um, in general, it seems to be a bit cleaner in most situations, as it would be. It's half the pixel size sensor, so it benefits from that. But they're both
Yeah.
totally usable.
I,
I
I,
mean,
I think that's
more than usable. Yeah.
the choice that you just have to make if you mostly in the photography section, as if you decide to go with the SL2 or SL2S, for the video output you get some more options when it comes to raw shooting with the SL2S, but then you have more megapixels on the SL2. So if you're the type of person that likes to crop in or that likes to
Hmm.
print really big, having both those options at the same time, both those offerings at the same time is really useful depending on exactly the type of photographer that you are. And actually, speaking about photography, I want to transition over to the subject of photography. I love this
Hmm.
shot that you took in the
Oh yeah.
desert with your SL2. Um, I want to transition over to your work with not only SL lenses, but also M lenses.
Hmm.
And you talked at the beginning of this program about how you love shooting with the Q2, shooting with the 28. Here we have you shooting with the 28 Summilux. You've shot with this lens for a little bit of time so far with the SL2. What is your
Hmm.
experience shooting with an M lens, a manual focus lens on the SL2?
So the quick story of like how that lens ended up on that camera is, I mean, I got the original Q in I think late 2015, like right when the Q came out, and I shot with that probably up through like mid 2020 or so, so a little bit into the Q2 cycle. But I just didn't need the extra resolution necessarily for what I was using it for. I probably still don't. But I ended up uh, parting ways with that camera sadly, and then getting an SL2. But I've just had gotten so used to the 28 focal length that
Sure.
it's just like ends up being kind of the way you see things. I just love, I love the fast 28 too, because you can, separate the subject, um, but you can, get so much context within the frame as well.
Yes.
So yeah, I thought I'd like create like the ultimate like Q and basically make an SL2 with a Summilux 28, which is great, and I love shooting with it. And it's like it's so fun using M lenses with SL2s because um, you can basically use this as a quick way to try to see it there.
Yep,
But the
I
top
see ya.
dial as a quick way to punch in magnification. You can get critical focus and then half press the shutter button and then recompose. And then it's just once you do that a couple times, it's almost as quick as shooting with the Q, but it's not quite as quick as shooting with the Q.
Yes.
And it's not quite as easy, and it does take a couple more brain cycles. So I ended up getting selling that lens and getting a Q2. Um, but I mean, in terms of the difference between the Q and Q2 28 Summilux and the M Summilux, the M Summilux seems to have more. I mean, it's definitely more vignette-y, even with like correction, and that's really kind of nice. It's a really good look,
Yeah.
and it's like it just seems to be like maybe a little creamier and softer and dreamier wide open. Whereas, I mean, the original Q uh, Summilux 1.7 or something like that. It was kind of an in between of that and what the Q2 is now, which the Q2 28 reminds me a lot of like the Apo Summicrons. It's just like
Right.
perfect, um,
Yes.
and it's yeah. I mean, perfection can be good, and then you also like end up dirtying it up or adding back in the vignette or a little bit. But this is a good example of a shot with the 28 Summilux M and just the fall off and then vignetting that you get wide open. It's
Right.
so pleasing. Kind
Do
of
you
miss
find
I miss
yourself
that lens.
do you find yourself when you're composing your images, when I see your work, I see this cinematic quality to it. I see these leading lines, I see how the light bounces
Hmm.
around. How do you approach your subjects when you're shooting up? Is it different than when you're on set with a video project, or do you talk to them a little more? Do you ask them to do different things? How does that work?
No, it's kind of similar. I mean, the only thing that would be different is if you were recording sound and you had to like somehow deal with that. But then like if you're not, it's very similar workflow. The way that you talk to somebody and position them and try to get them in certain spots and play off the context. um but yeah, no, it's like a similar thing where you're trying to add as much visual interest as possible to a single frame, especially with something like this. I mean, you can imagine this translating pretty easily to motion. um
Hmm. Sure.
like yeah, you kind of shoot it the same way. I mean, the thing I do a lot more is shoot portrait ratio. I mean, I'm not shooting portrait ratio much on motion. um but
But I love the
yeah, and
context that it brings. The
I
28,
do
you have
too.
the
Yeah.
person, and then it's where they are, what they're doing. The person's important, but the environment really complements the storytelling aspect of it. It
Yeah, and it's
really
like the
adds to.
like 28 at 1.7 on a full frame sensor is like the perfect balance of like separation and context. To me, I think 35 starts to feel like no man's land a little bit, and then 50 it starts to make sense again. Like that's
Right.
kind of where I am, is like 28 and 50 right now for stills is like where I gravitate to most often. And then on the motion side, I would say like I mean, if there's like a 32 or something, that's kind of like the sweet spot because
Nice.
you can, yeah, I don't know, but on Super 35, yeah.
I'd be intrigued to see what you think of like a 40 millimeter, like the 40 millimeter Summicron that came out a couple decades ago, because it's just right in between that 35 and 50. So you get a little bit of wide angle. You get a little more, environment than what a 50 will give you, but not quite as much as what a 35 will give you. It's a
Yeah,
very interesting focal length.
I'm in Texas right now, up near Denton, and there's a great used camera shop, one of the best used camera shops, called Denton Camera Exchange, here in town. And I was in there a couple days ago, and they had that 40 in there,
Oh,
and I put it
nice.
on, and it's like, yeah, it is that like weird, like this makes sense. It makes sense more than a 35, and it's not quite. I don't know, it's weird.
I love it. It's great.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about these shots here? Is this more of a commercial shoot? There's external lighting. What's going on?
Yeah, no external lighting for any of this. Actually, so this is all for a Stetson campaign. It was shot in Lajitas, Texas, which is right on the border of Mexico. It's like sandwiched in between. Big Bend National Park and the state park. And we mostly shot in the state park. I think it was just easier to get permission to shoot there. But I was shooting alongside a photographer named Alistair Taylor Young, who's just an incredible Paris-based photographer. He was doing kind of the main heavy lifting. He was using some strobes, and I was able to like sneak around with my SL2 and the 28, and then I had my RZ with me as well, and get like the kind of the B angles, which ended up being some really cool angles.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, but this is like, I mean, I think especially the image on the right is a cool example of how manipulatable the images can be from the SL2 files.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the gradation, I mean, having, the sun in the shot, and then you have the gradation in the sky, but also the gradation that you have of all the sand and all the dust being kicked up, and how it slowly goes to dark. And then you have the lines of the mountains in the background. I mean, I love this shot. It's such a dramatic shot. When you were shooting this, were you using the electronic shutter to compensate, or were you stopping down, or?
I usually keep it on hybrid shutter, like if I'm outside, and
Sure.
I think it probably did kick into electronic for sure. I do know it probably looked nothing like this when I captured it. It was probably much more exposed for him, and I ended up just bringing it down and then taking a gradient filter in Lightroom and bringing back up the dust. And the dust was all like leaf blowers that were on the side of that image, is just like kicking it up. Thankfully, it wasn't that windy. Yeah.
Nice. And actually, that's a good transition to your landscape work. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on, you're shooting in the desert in these situations. I know that you also shoot sometimes in the rain. The Q2, the SL2 are sealed. How does that work as far as you're traveling a lot of time, having a system that can be taken into these kind of weather conditions? Has that been a negative, a positive for you? How do you see that?
Definitely very positive. Like, I think that's a good point with the image on the left in particular, because it's out in Death Valley, where you're like probably not wanting to change lenses that much if you can avoid it. I think this was a really still morning, so it didn't matter. But this was the 24-90.
Yes.
And that was the perfect lens to have out there, because you just walk around, you have everything you need. You're no compromises. You don't necessarily need the super speed either. It's like a variable aperture zoom, but just as clean as any prime in any situation. And then so for the Q2, I've gotten it very wet recently, and it's been totally fine. Probably more wet than you'd want to get it, but not like dunked, but and for the original Q, I mean, it's not supposed to be in the rain, but if you put some electrical tape over the microphone holes and everything, it can handle a good sprinkle. So it's definitely nice to have the sealing of like the Leica primes and the zooms, though, because I think pretty sure the Sigma is not sealed in the same way. I don't know about the Panasonics. They're probably not either. Or they might be on the body, but not on the mount.
Sure.
It's always good to have protection for sure.
The SL prime lenses have Aquadura on them, which is excuse me, a water repelling coating. So if you're like me, you live in the Pacific Northwest and it is rainy and stormy all the time. It's just nice to know that I can take this camera out and have a lens cloth onto the glass and I'm ready to rock. I think that's the main thing. The versatility, the sealing, and the ability to really, I mean, the diversity of the images that we're showing today, I think showcases what is possible with the system, from video to photo.
Oh, for sure. You definitely don't ever have to worry about it, handling the elements. And I always keep like, unless I'm doing something really critical that I don't want any sort of like filtration on the front of the lens, I'll always keep a UV filter on.
Sure.
I usually don't even keep lens caps on. I know a lot of people do that, where they just keep a UV filter and leave the lens cap at home, and then it's one less thing you have to juggle.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Indeed.
Yeah.
And I know that you're also a big watch fan. And I know that you have a number of watches. You like to photograph watches. Can you tell us a little bit about this shoot here?
Yeah, this was for Hodinkee, so they're like a big watch blog publication. They also have a web store as well. And this was for the launch of the Blancpain. Um, gosh, it was like a desert edition of their. I can't remember how to say the name. It's like
It's beautiful.
Bathyscaphe, yeah, or Bathyscape. But yeah, really beautiful watch, really cool. And yeah, they had me go out to the desert with my friend Justin, and yeah, we just shot in Death Valley for. I think we left at midnight from LA and got there about 5 a.m. and it was like it was August, so we shot from
Mm,
about 5 a.m. to about 10, and it was
it's
scary
enough.
hot after that. But yeah, we got everything we needed. But I think these are both 20. Yeah, I think everything that we did here was 24 to 90 um,
Yes.
SL zoom, which is it's just awesome. I love that lens.
And are you using any kind of external lighting, or is this all the sun bouncing on the sand?
I think in this situation, it's just like you rely on the dynamic range of the file and try to hit it in the sweet spot so that you have room to push and pull. But it's
Right.
just too much of a. Sometimes it's too much of a pain, and it was just the two of us on this shoot too. So you can
Sure.
you can juggle a bounce. Sometimes I may have had a bounce with me because the reflectivity of the watch. It's sometimes nice to get a bounce in really close overhead just to kill any reflections. But I probably had a Pola too for these. I almost certainly did for how clean they look. Um, so that cut through a lot of the reflections, and I was able to probably
Right.
clean up the rest of that afterwards. But no, to your point, I will use flashes and strobes and things like that. But a lot of times in these scenarios, you just try to hit that midpoint of exposure, and you'll know that you have the leeway.
Love it. I have another question here regarding your personal video work. Favorite pieces that you shot or edited? Anything from a ghost story? It's one of the works
Um,
that you've done before.
yeah, I was. That was one of the coolest projects I've worked on for a lot of reasons. It was so the DP of that, Andrew Palermo, he asked me. He was having a little trouble finding a gaffer for the location that the film was shooting. Asked me if I would come out. I had already been kind of signed on to do second unit for that, and the gaffing was fairly lightweight and not a situation where I was in over my head in terms of electricity. So I was able to come out and do that, but um, because of the way it was, I had a lot of time to take stills on that set as well, and that ended up becoming a book, which was really neat. Um, yeah, that was probably one of the best. Other than that, I mean, they're all I guess special in their own way, you know.
Fantastic. Love it.
Yeah.
We get a last series of images right here. One of the questions that we're seeing from Stephen here is, what photography software do you use for editing? We just talked a lot about just using the dynamic range of the camera to achieve that watch shot. What do you use for editing?
I just use Lightroom Classic. I tried to transition over to Capture One, but like all my library was in Lightroom and everything, and it was just too much of a pain. So I'll use Capture One for tethering shoots because it's the best for that. Um, and there's stuff in there that I wish was in Lightroom that isn't, that I hopefully will matriculate over there. But yeah, I mean, basically just take everything into Lightroom. I have some like sort of presets that I've used for years that will sometimes be like a starting point, just to like change the color response or make things, give things a certain feel. But then it's just a lot of like, basically, lifting the shadows, digging out a little bit of information. Maybe, usually don't have that back in too much sharpness with these modern lenses. Just tweaking exposure, and then I'll do a lot of like secondary correction with individual colors. So I'll take
Mm.
skies, a little bit more teal sometimes than they are naturally, things like that. But yeah, Lightroom.
And it kind of comes back to our conversation about the lenses here. In these particular case that we see on screen is shot with the SL primes. We talked about using the M lenses. We talked about using the Q2. What is your experience with shooting with the SL primes?
I mean, they're just like the most incredible, sharp, but also like beautiful, pleasing lenses you can imagine. They're too good. I think the one on the left is the 28, and then I think the one on the right might be the 28 as well, just like very cropped in.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I mean, they're super sharp. They have like kind of they were advertised, or there's been videos on the Leica channel about how they have similar fall off to a Summilux,
Yes.
just in the way they're designed, and that seems to be true for sure. It's like, if these are more like master primes or something like that on the cinema side, then like Summilux is more like a Cook lens. It just like that has a bit more humanity to it, whereas it's like master primes are like Summilux C's or something like that. The focus drops off pretty quickly.
Sure.
Yeah,
yes.
And they're pretty. I wouldn't call them clinical. It's just they're modern, very modern.
Yes. Very accurate.
But it's kind of nice to have that, though. It's like, it's nice to start off with like a base of like as good as you can possibly get, and then be able to like manipulate it, because you can't really bring that back.
Right. It's always easier to take away than to add.
I think these are both lit with like the source is a Parabolics 45, so it's like Parabolics. It's Parabolics with an X at the end. It's a parabolic reflector company that's based out of Los Angeles. They offer, essentially the same quality as Broncolor for a little less price. Although now Godox makes parabolic reflectors, and other people do too. But yeah, super, super pretty, good for portraiture, good for, I use them on documentary shows too, as like the key light for interviews. And yeah, I think there's a Godox 8600 Pro in there, so it's just a wireless monolight situation.
And it works out for the reflection. I mean, I love that little detail.
Yeah, it doesn't look cool.
In the glasses.
I like it.
Yeah, that's the beautiful composition. Love that. Well, Bret, we only have a couple more minutes left. I want to ask you about your upcoming projects. What are you excited about? What's going on in your life? How can we follow you?
It's been a really busy year. I've shot like 3 shows this year so far, none of which I can really like talk about, but they will be out later this year, so that's cool. Maybe doing a show at like a gallery LA with my friend Nick Calico early next year, so that's really exciting.
Love it.
And yeah, beyond that, just trying to find new projects, new people to work with. It's always looking for new directors, new producers. Hire me, please.
Any Leica lenses you have your eye on? Anything that's
Yeah, I rented from Lens Rentals like a couple weeks ago the Summilux SL50, because I had shot a lot with the Apos so far, just either borrowing or using other people's or renting them, and they're clearly amazing. But like, I just wanted to see if the Summilux was worth the extra heft. It's a big bean can of a lens, so it's kind of crazy.
Sure.
But yeah, it's gorgeous. So I think it's either that, or it's probably that or the Apos Summicron. But I found that like that's the best compliment to the Q2 28 is like a 50 for me. Any longer than that, it's like you lose context, and it's just not how I see things. Yeah.
I'm excited to see what you do with that 50. I saw some of the images you shot already in Death Valley, and I'm obviously blown away by your work. So I'm very excited to see where you go with that.
Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, it's a pretty lens.
Folks, you can follow Bret Curry on his website, bretcurry.com, and on his Instagram, @Bret Curry. You can also follow us with Leica Camera USA with the SL2 Owners Workshop happening later this summer. And of course, all of our workshops are at our LeicaCameraUSA.com site /Leica-Academy. We have bespoke sessions, we have SL2 classes, M classes, Q2 classes, specialty classes, I invite you to check that out. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Any last thoughts, Bret?
No, not really. Just thank you, Nathan, for having me here today. It's always great to talk to you, and thanks everybody for showing up and asking questions.
The pleasure was ours. Thank you so much, folks. We'll see you next time for another Leica Conversations with Sharice May later this month. Ciao.